Laureate of Michigan, I believe, is responsible for promoting reading, hopefully writing, but certainly book culture. The Poet Laureate engages Michigan public, usually in libraries or schools, where reading and writing take place, right? But also, I think, to continue to be a poet, to continue to respond and document in a creative format what's going on with the people during the time that you're serving in that position as Poet Laureate. There are different kinds of poets, first of all, and some poets don't engage a political climate, for example. Some poets don't even engage, I would say, concrete experiences as a reference. They'll just maybe deal with emotions, thoughts, words as an artifact to some extent. The poetry that I've always been interested in is poetry that spoke to experience and also exposed an insight that took you somewhere that you never really thought about it in that way. Poetry is a creative art. Therefore, I believe it should be interesting, it should be well crafted, it should have nuances, and not necessarily tell you, but you're trying to get people to feel what you're feeling. You're trying to reach them at their core, to move them. As Dudley Randall would say, good poetry is poetry that moves you. So not necessarily even for you to agree, but to recognize that there's something here that maybe I should think about. But I really like writing about people, and then also moving from people into ideas, creative ways of thinking, but also ways of reflecting, and one examining how you view the world, the way you view yourself in that world, and also expanding those considerations. The Abandoned Automobile, Detroit Poetry, 2001, was a collaboration with another poet, editor, M.L. Lieber. Shout out to him. And we know a vast number of poets between two of us, right? And also we both are poets and teachers of poetry, so we felt it was necessary to do something upon the 300th anniversary of the city of Detroit, right? But also, Detroit had become known as the automobile city. That became its, shall we say, iconic identity because of the Industrial Revolution and so forth. And we are actually saying, okay, we are, Detroit is the car, but we're more than the car. And you've got to, lead the car back and, and let's look at, the people. Let's think about what Detroit life has meant, and how have Detroit poets, at least over the 20th century, has represented that life in Detroit. At the same time, so much of that word is, imagery is car, including the image we put on the front of the book, but it's also art. It's an abandoned with the ED automobile. We use abandon as in the terms of the verb to say, let it go, okay? Drive somewhere else, without a car, right? Go somewhere without a car. So that was what we were trying to get at, the ambiguity of the language, but also the identity of the city. often been asked a question, what is it like to be a poet from Detroit? And again, I've lived other places, in my career as a professor, Iowa City, Columbus, Ohio, Holly, Michigan. Actually, I'd stayed there lived there when I was at University of Michigan, Flint. The thing about Detroit is that it's so complex. Lots of really interesting people, but also the culture. As a Black person growing up in Detroit at a time when the city was after World War II and the city was really doing well, got a great education, and my family did really well, and it was a lot of positive. And then you have the difficulties, the struggles, the racial struggles. But there is a lot to be learned, not just so much from the good parts, but also the struggles. How do we learn through things that we don't want to have to go through again? And at the same time, understand why hard times are a part of life. And how do you extract meaning out of difficulty and help to take the culture, the people to the next level? Certainly traveling gave me even a broader, deeper sense of appreciation for the city of Detroit because of the culture. And I would meet people, it could be anywhere. I remember being in China, in Shanghai, and the taxi driver is playing Stevie Wonder. I'm like, whoa, And so you don't fully, I sometimes don't think people in the city oftentimes don't fully appreciate the city because they don't leave it often enough, or they don't go far enough away where they will see that the city is perceived differently by different cultures.
Right.
And they think, for the most part, it was like, oh, Detroit is really cool. It's really cool. Detroit, I'm like, yeah, cool, yeah. But it's been really also the value of living in a city that's on an international boundary.
Right.
It's a crossing into another country. And the value of that is so heavy, I can't even talk about it in one sweep, but that growing up, going to Canada just for dinner, going to Point Pelee, in the summer, going over into further beyond Windsor just to go buy vegetables and fruits, and having access to media coming in from Canada.
Right.
You grow up with a international, I think, more complex perspective if you're paying attention.
Right.
If you don't turn the station on, you don't turn the radio on,
you miss it.
You miss it. But I really appreciate having had the advantage of living in two countries, and two countries that were, at peace with each other, at least until maybe recently. Gotten a little intense, but the people, though, still are very cool, and I do spend a lot of time even up further in the Bruce Peninsula on Lake Huron and the Georgian Bay, and there's a whole community there that I've grown up in, for our summer home there. And those are things that situation doesn't exist in a whole lot of places.
Right.
I don't think. And the nature, I'm totally a nature person. My mother was a swimming teacher, so
oh, wow.
Yeah, so I'm a water baby. So we were always in the water. My babies are water babies, and my grandbabies are water babies. My grandson right now is learning how to do the backstroke. Okay, yeah. But I just love Michigan. It's just wonderful. We've got we're in one of the most unique places on the planet. We've got more fresh water than anywhere else on the planet. And I don't think a lot of times people don't think about it. I would actually sometimes meet people at the university, even sometimes students who have been from another state, and I'm like, you haven't gone to any of the Great Lakes? I don't mean Detroit River, the river leads somewhere. And I'm like, no, I said, you've got to take advantage.
Absolutely.
This is an incredible place. I'm like, oh, okay, I didn't really think about it. I said, yeah, just going up to Lake Huron, go over there and check out, Lake Erie. It's really amazing. So you've got everything. You've got interesting people. There's a diverse population. Certainly, one of the advantages of growing up in Detroit. And you've got an incredible geography. And I can't think of any other place I would have wanted to have been born, and where I grew up, and where I learned to write. Well, I think one of my ways that I realize develop my poetry, I always like to start with self, but I don't mean the obsessive self, but self in the sense of interesting things that you have learned or observed, like among your family members, stories that they've told, aspects about their lifestyle. One of my favorite poems is about an aunt who lived a very simple life, but a very meaningful life in the way that she serviced her community. She was a very sort of paradoxical character, in the sense that my mother always said that out of all of her siblings, this sister was the smartest. But she started college, and she was she couldn't handle it. Because she was born, in previous decades, and she couldn't deal with the racism that she encountered, and her feelings would get hurt. She wasn't as tough as my mother. Like, I don't care what they think. She's just going to do what she's going to do. But my aunt was much more sensitive. But then I grew up in her house, and her house was just amazing. The way she would counsel her neighbors, the way that she would always send food to someone who was ill, the way that she would always look out for all of the kids in their neighborhood, and there was always a place where the children could come and stay, or it was just amazing how she nursed family members, and at the same time dealing with the politics of the city and problems that would arise, political problems. And so I start there. I said, there's a lot of interesting people who are living important aspects of what's important about life.
Right.
Caring for other people, not being selfish, being, giving, and not expecting anything in return. And I found that when I would read the poem, and I just thought she was really, I just loved her. I loved her. I was crazy about her. I'm gonna write this poem. And I found when I would read the poem to children in Detroit in particular, I remember reading the poem in a classroom at Cass Tech High School. And this one kid said, I know a lady just like that on my street. And so that touched him. And so that's what I want to do. I want to touch, people. And he may have never thought that the lady on her block was that important to be in a poem, you see. And so I always try to encourage them, write from your own experience, but not necessarily you, but how you have experienced life and other people. Not to say that you don't have some meaning in that, but that's a different kind of writing. And sometimes what you think is so important to you, it's really not that interesting when you write it down. It's like, okay, save it for the obituary. But I think people, historic moments, and moments in a way that it's not going to be written about in the newspaper.
Right.
Another one of my favorite poems is when they imploded the J.L. Hudson building in downtown Detroit. And for me, it was destruction of history in a concrete form.
Absolutely.
It's gone. That building is gone. Now, it lives in my dreams. I can still see it. And but I wanted to write about it in a way that it wasn't just nostalgia, but I wanted it to be presented as, stop destroying history. Stop, this is important. This building carries people's lives. And so the refrain was, where do the ghosts go? Because in a way, we're the ghosts. And that the sort of loss of that space, that place, I think is important. And it's a thing that American society does often. We throw things away very quickly. Let's just tear it down, build something else.
Right.
And I like old stuff. I do. I like old houses. I live in houses 100 years old, right? And I've always been attracted to that. Not to say I don't like modern buildings.
Right.
I can appreciate that too. But for example, this building we're in, this is a beautiful building, but most of the building that they put up in place of the old Hudson's, no, not cute, not cute, guys. No. It's nothing compared, even within its modern context, it's nothing compared to the nuances and the style and the substance of the old Hudson building. That's an interesting question, because I never really thought about the future. I'm really such a historian at heart. But I think even in the sense of when you're writing about history, you're writing about concern for the future.
Right.
And to not necessarily say, I don't want to go, the future is why we have to understand where we've been. Right? So if you don't know that or you can't appreciate that, then you end up not in a sort of a spiral and going forward. You end up in a circle or chasing your tail. Yeah, and that's, you have to have insight not to do that.
Right.
And so I think that poetry really should help us as a species to be more self-critical. But also as a poet, you gotta be critical of yourself too.
Yes.
You can't start thinking that you know more. So in some ways you want the poem not to say this is what it is. You want the poem to get people to think about the way that they think about that subject, right? So, or sometimes I have this one poem that's very popular called We Want Our City Back. And the thing about that poem is I always say that it didn't come from me, it came through me. And what happened was I just a lot of things that people were saying at the time I was composing it, and I just wrote it down. And in the end, the refrain was, we want it back. We want it the way we want to have a city. This is our city. What's going on?
Absolutely.
This is not the way people should be treated. And I remember once a guy said to me, well, was it really your city? I said, it's not that kind of want.
Right.
It's not the kind of want that in a nostalgic way of a space. It's an attitude in terms of wanting for people to treat each other that they did before, all these things happened. And now people are suffering,
Yes.
We don't need this, we don't want this, we want it the way it used to be. And a lot of people don't understand or realize that when I was a child growing up in the 50s and 60s, that I was safe, I was happy. We weren't wealthy by any stretch of the imagination, and nobody, at least in the neighborhood, was, in dire straits in the sense that they couldn't get help.
Right.
Just sort of basic humanity. Is I think what the poem is about. Like, what is going on here? This is not our city. We want what it used to be, the way it was, right? And that may be nostalgia in some ways, but at the same time, I don't think because you live in a big city or you're living a more sophisticated existence that you should sacrifice your humanity.
Absolutely.
And yet it does happen a lot. The cold indifference, for example, the absence of real culture.
Yes.
And not just stuff that makes you excited or whatever, but take something away from that, and it's enriching your life, which is kind of maybe a cliche thing to say, but that's what can sometimes happen, and I want to feel like I'm alive, and I don't want to have to be, like looking at a scary movie because I don't like to be scared, right? But no, I mean, it's that's what artists, I think, of all ilk, whether it's music, painting, or writing, you're trying to enrich the culture. That's the one thing. That's one thing about form. Poetry. It's a composition. It's in a form. It's just like painting or music. You have to take it, and then you're going to have to rearrange it so that it's just not like all out there, right?
Right.
It's just you gotta make it happen. You know what I'm saying? It's like when you get up in the morning and putting on your lipstick or you combing your hair, like that curl is going that way, like pin it down, that's the wrong direction. It's a matter of looking at that and then seeing in that what looks to be like chaos, and identifying, well, where are the connections, where's the pattern, where is it coming from, where is it going, what does it intersect with? And yes, so chaos is a really difficult time. My problem with chaos is I have a tendency towards sarcasm, so I have to try to bring, okay, don't do that. That's not nice. Don't do that. And then sometimes I don't want to be nice.
Right.
So like, yeah, but it fits, right? So yeah, it's like any other art form. You're taking raw material and you're shaping it so that it makes more sense, or you're finding a resolution to a problem. Well, I think, like I said before, paying attention, really paying attention. I don't mean just like say to the news, but to people, your feelings. Poetry is it's very subjective.
Yes.
It's also objective, but the feeling part is a big part of it, so you can't ignore your feelings.
Right.
Because if you ignore your feelings, then your vocabulary is going to shift. And so you want to make sure that that barometer is a part of the way that you're filtering your thoughts. It's also important to keep a blank book,
Yes.
a journal.
Okay.
And I think it was Dudley Rounder who said sometimes you write a poem and it may be finished in 1 week. Other poems, it may take years, you know, because the pieces are not there. You've got to go through something else before this makes meaning. So you should always jot your ideas down. This is a different time, so people got their phones or whatever you do, whatever you got to do, your note on your phone. I'm old school, you know, so I like having the blank book.
Absolutely.
Because that way I know I won't lose it.
Right.
Because it's concrete. But also, I will put things, write things on the computer, go back, edit right on top of words. One of the advantages of technology is you can edit on top of the words, but you also have to be very careful because you may need to save drafts.
Right.
Because you could change something and you shouldn't have. Whereas you do it in your journal, you'll draw a line through a word, or you put a word over here, you can go back and switch it up.
Right.
But if you typed on top of the words, then you forgot which the other draft, right?
Exactly.
So there's advantage to do it in both ways. I do both. And sometimes I'll be like, okay, this is the poem, and it'll be like number 1, that means draft 1.
Yeah.
Then I may come back, copy the draft, and then type on top of that, and then that'll become draft 2.
Okay.
So that way you don't lose the process.
Right.
Because you may need to go back. The last poem that I wrote was long poem anyway. I've written since then, but it was a long poem, so it was a long time on James Baldwin. And I found that I needed to go. I would move whole parts around, or even stanzas, and put it on page 5. It may have been on page 3.
Okay.
Where I don't like, or it was fine on page 5, but I don't like the shift of the mood of the poem.
Right.
So I'm going to move part 3. I'm going to put it in. That's going to be part 4.
Okay.
So I think technology is great, but you got to remember that you need to use it creatively.
Yes.
The way that folks used to do, or composers writing music, they'll write notes on top of the music sheet, right?
Yeah.
And so just remember that you don't want to throw it away or lose it, because you might want to use it. And you may not want to necessarily use it in that poem. It may go away.
Right.
But you might want to use it somewhere else, you know. So that's sort of my advice, and to young writers, and travel.
Yes.
So you expand your perspective. So I love Detroit to death, but I have to get out of it. And I write about it better when I'm not in it.
Right.
But travel also allows you to have a more objective view of even yourself.